Welcome to part 2 of the Programming Principles online session. We will look at muscular systems response to exercise and learning more about biomechanics here. This session will run for 10 minutes, so you know the drill by now. Find a quiet space, free from interruption, and grab a pen and notepad. We're going to start by looking at how our muscles respond to exercise, and we're fully aware by this point the positive effect on muscles that inactivity will lead to muscle atrophy. However, we do need to know how training affects the muscle tissue. So when we program, we can ensure that we're building but also maintaining that positive effect. One of the most common effects on muscle tissue is to produce hypertrophy or an increase in muscle size. So the capabilities to gain hypertrophy is very dependent on genetics, testosterone levels, and we can see training can elicit about 30 to 60% increases in size. So that is an expansion of the diameter of the individual muscle fibers and an increase of the numbers of myofilament in each sarcomere. Then the amount of, or the number of mitochondria will increase by thereabouts of 120%. So they will have more available to the muscle cells. So the muscle cells will undergo a surge of ATP, and around 60 to 80% of that muscle cell will store 50% more glycogen. So we can see that percentage, and with regards to fatty acid storage, it means it will have a greater anaerobic and aerobic capacity for each of our muscles, making it more efficient and giving us the ability to work at higher intensities for longer periods of time. When we look at the length-tension relationship, this occurs when actin and myosin overlap and are linked together. So it brings that relationship. Opposite to that, the underactive state means that there is less of an overlap and less of those cross bridges. So it's really important that we apply the level of tension relationship to exercise so that the muscle is capable of generating the most tension in the mid-range proportions or positions. And these are the safest positions for our clients to build muscle when they're working. So the interaction between musculoskeletal and the nervous system is essential for movement. And when we move, the defining balancing act between opposing muscles when the muscle is engaged in activity is something that's really important. For example, the antagonist muscle will lengthen and yield in order for an action to take place. And this is called reciprocal inhibition. It's the body's way of maintaining balance. When you think of reciprocal inhibition, it can become an issue when a muscle is chronically tight or overactive, or when the muscle is being repeatedly recruited. So they become more active and shortened, and that's what it can lead to. It also will compromise that length-tension relationship and can lead to an imbalance. So sometimes you will see poor joint range of movement as well as compensating movements that cause ultimate injuries, which the muscle is in that activated state. So we really want to make sure that we test so that the underactive muscle is, if it is weak, we are obviously building that up. And the tension in the long range of movement test is that if they are incapable of performing that role or the muscle isn't recruited properly, that we do a substitution pattern or start to build it up. So this in turn will have an effect on how the exercise is performed and how much can be recruited. So we need to be able to give our client the feedback and also for our client to understand that in the appropriate techniques that we use. In regards to our bodies receiving constant feedback, it will receive it from everything, but there's 3 main forms that we would do it. So we've got the internal or sensory feedback, which involves receiving and interpreting signals from the nervous system. So this is crucial for when we perform an exercise. An excellent technique will provide our sensory organs feedback, allowing it to interpret good movements. So remembering those good movement mechanics As personal trainers, we play a major role in relying on external feedback, so giving them that additional information to improve the quality of their movement and provide them it verbally. We can also do it through touch, so we can use constant and effective feedback there to assist them in initializing the skill and then furthering it by repeating it multiple times. So when we use the touch technique, it'll be tactile, and we want to accommodate for the correction of the technique. So what we really want to understand is that we've got the baseline of the mechanics, we know how the muscle works, and how we can give that feedback to enhance those patterns. We can start to explore a lot of the primal movement patterns and look at biomechanics in exercise to do that. So let's have a look at the forces that are acting on our body. Our body has force placed on it from many different angles of gravity, and this is a natural phenomenon by things that energy is brought towards one another. So first and foremost, the load, which refers to the structural load of our bodies, or the forces which are applied to it in activities like lifting or carrying. Whereas the force action is in one direction, we have a reaction force as well as a force acting in the opposing direction. Then you've got ground reaction, which is the force exerted by the ground on our body in contact while we're in motion. So this would be things like walking, running, skipping, jumping. So how much force is going through it. Drag can slow us down, so as it's a force acting opposing or opposite to our relative motion. And buoyancy, which is the upward force that opposes the weight in the immersed object or the body so that it can keep afloat. So putting that into practice, we then want to know that the forces that are being placed on our body on a daily basis, we need to ensure we have a good base of support and a great center of gravity in order to perform those primal movement patterns. These movement patterns that humans perform date back thousands of years and are the basis of all of our movements, including our exercises. So many different everyday tasks or functional tasks are based on our primal patterns, and we need to have the awareness to make judgments on those quality movements and also have the most appropriate exercise selection here. So the quality of movement is an underlying component of technical proficiency. And the information that a personal trainer is able to gather when a client moves will determine the readiness for that client to progress or have more complexity in their program. So it'll allow us to judge and influence the intensity and the load. Set up in a scenario of, say, the squat that you can see here, it's going to be something that will need to be mastered over a very long period of time because lots of different muscles will be working in that way. So we've got some common movement patterns on screen that you can see. This is obviously just a simple lunge, stepping forward and changing direction. So to perform a lunge safely, our client does need a wide support range so that they place their feet hip width apart before stepping forward into the lunge. And we can make that a lunge more challenging by taking the support base away from them. So walking lunges, placing one foot on an unstable surface like a BOSU, or changing direction, which they might need to lunge laterally or diagonally to then replicate movements. You could also use in some different carrying techniques or lifting techniques to change that primal pattern into something a little bit more hard. Then you really want to make sure that the exercise is still being safely and correctly progressed. So, training solutions for a lunge is to ensure safety, challenge of the exercise, and progress the exercise. So the push-up will be a very similar movement in getting out of bed or from the ground to perform an exercise. You want them to start by laying on the floor with their hands flat on the floor. And then if the client is able to do the push-up on their toes or on their knees, you can progress them to their toes. So always looking for those safer options will be something that we really want to make sure of. So that is a very common movement pattern. When we see this, a beginner would obviously always be looking at the alignment of the back and making sure that the progressions are using unstable surfaces, directions, or complexity there. So have a bit of a think about the training solutions for a push-up to ensure safety, challenge of the exercise, and progressing the exercise. So it's really, really key that you take this information away with you and start to think of the biomechanics behind it. The last common movement pattern is what we see here. It's finally our exercise, which is a lunge or a low row being done. And you can see some of this is pulling the body up from the ground. So this is pulling objects towards us. And it also replicates an action of climbing. So it's really, really important that we do this safely and we can bring our clients into an almost vertical position to perform the row and then challenge them as we need to. So take your time to write down these 3 exercises: the lunge, the push-up, and the row. Consider how you can regress the exercise and make them successfully safer, but also create challenge in the exercise. We need to understand how to ensure safety, how to have challenge in the exercise, and how to progress the exercise when the client needs to. Alrighty, I hope that makes sense for you. And that is the end of part 2. I hope you're feeling more confident to explain the science behind exercise that programming does include, and including primal movement patterns to assist your clients in being more efficient in their daily life. In part 3, we'll look at the effects of poor posture that movement has, and then we'll wrap up the session with environmental training. All right, when you're ready to move on, feel free to press start.